If I told you that a single spit on a grandmother's face could be the most desperate proof of a grandson's love, would you believe it? I didn't believe it until I witnessed the day Evelyn Reed's world, a woman who lived for her books and roses, shattered into 1,000 pieces because of a dark secret. And what I discovered, what no one tells you, is that the line between hate and love can be thinner and crueler than you imagine. Imagine waking up on a Saturday morning and, instead of your peaceful routine of tea and newspapers, you find the police at your door. A simple act of anger the night before, the fury of a 17-year-old boy turns, in seconds, into the most agonizing search of your life. Today, I'm going to show you how the search for a missing grandson can reveal truths a grandmother never wanted to know, and how the same hatred that destroyed her could be the only key to saving him. You will learn to read the signs of a cry for help before it's too late. Every second matters, because ignoring this lesson could cost you your most precious possession. Stay with me until the end, and discover the secret meaning behind that spit, the real reason Leo disappeared. You won't believe what Evelyn found hidden inside that note of apology, a secret that changed everything. But maybe it was already too late. I was 78 years old that Friday, but I didn't feel fragile. My knees still carried me up and down the stairs of my little 2-story house in Maple Grove, Iowa, and my mind was still sharp enough to remember every name in our town library. I'd been a librarian for over 4 decades, and even after retiring, the smell of old paper and the rustle of pages still felt like home. My days had a steady rhythm. Roses in the morning, tea and the local paper, afternoons volunteering at the library, and then, most days, there was Leo, my grandson, my pride, my headache, my reason for staying young. That week had been strange. Leo had been distant, colder than usual. He'd been skipping school, and when I asked him about it earlier in the week, he'd mumbled something about teachers not getting it. But I kept telling myself he was just 17, navigating that stormy space between boyhood and manhood. I had planned Friday night carefully. Roast chicken with rosemary from my own garden, mashed potatoes with extra butter, his favorite. I thought maybe food, that old language of comfort, could thaw whatever ice had been building between us. When Leo walked in just after 6, the first thing I noticed was how he didn't meet my eyes. His shoulders were tight, and his jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. He didn't even comment on the smell of the chicken, which used to make him grin like a little boy. I waited until he'd sat down, until we'd each taken a few bites, before I asked gently, "Leo, can we talk about your school attendance? I'm worried about you." My voice was soft, the way you'd speak to a frightened bird. It was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. His fork clanged onto the plate, and suddenly, words poured out of him, sharp, hot, and meant to cut. "You're always meddling. You don't know me, Grandma. You think you control me, but you don't." I sat frozen, my hands in my lap, watching my grandson's face twist into something I barely recognized. I tried to explain that I only wanted to help, but my voice barely made it past my throat. Then it happened. He leaned forward, eyes full of some wild teenage rage I couldn't name, and spat right in my face. For a second, I couldn't process it. The warm shock of it, the sheer, deliberate disrespect. My heart stuttered, not from anger, but from something deeper, grief. This was the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had chased away with stories. And now he looked at me like I was nothing. I didn't yell. I didn't throw him out. I just stood, walked to the kitchen sink, washed my face in silence, and went upstairs. My hands trembled as I turned the lock on my bedroom door. On the nightstand sat a picture of Leo as a 5-year-old, holding a library card with a grin full of missing teeth. I lay down and cried until my pillow was wet, my breath hiccuping in the dark. Somewhere between sobs, I fell asleep. The morning light felt thin, hesitant, like it was afraid to enter my room. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not ready to face whatever version of Leo I might find downstairs. But the house was too quiet. No creak of floorboards, no sound of him rummaging for breakfast. At 9:12 a.m., a knock came at the door. Not the quick, casual knock of a neighbor, but a firm, measured rhythm. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch, their faces set in a way that made my stomach drop. One was tall, with pale eyes that kept flicking to the ground. The other, shorter, held his hat in both hands like he was bracing himself. "Mrs. Reed?" the taller one asked. I nodded, gripping the doorframe. "We need to speak with you about your grandson." I stepped back to let them in, my hands cold despite the warmth of the house. The taller officer spoke first, his voice steady but edged with something that made my skin prickle. "Your grandson, Leo Reed. He's missing." The word "missing" hung in the air like smoke, hard to breathe through. He explained that Leo's car had been found abandoned on the side of the highway just outside town. No signs of an accident, no note left behind in the vehicle. His phone, they said, was still here at the house. I remember staring at them, trying to imagine Leo anywhere but here, trying to picture him choosing to walk away from his life. My mind reached back to last night, replaying every sharp word, every flicker of anger in his eyes, wondering if I had somehow pushed him away forever. The shorter officer took a step forward, his tone softer. "Mrs. Reed, there's more you should know." He paused, glancing at his partner before continuing. "Leo, he was a witness to a robbery that happened about a week ago. You might have heard about it, the Peterson case." I had. Everyone in Maple Grove had. A well-known businessman in town had been robbed of a large sum of money and something they only described as sensitive data. I remembered reading about it in the paper, but it felt like a story from another world, one that couldn't possibly have anything to do with my grandson. But now, sitting on my own couch, the world had shifted, and the danger felt like it had walked right through my front door. They told me Leo had seen the perpetrators, members of a local gang with a reputation for violence, and that he had been scheduled to testify on Monday morning. "We don't know if his disappearance is related to that," the taller one added, "but it's a possibility we're considering seriously." My mouth went dry. I thought of Leo's sudden mood swings, the nights he stayed out too late, the way his eyes darted to the windows whenever a loud car passed. I had thought it was just teenage rebellion. Now I wondered if it had been fear all along. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where had they searched? Who had they spoken to? How could this have been happening under my roof without me seeing it? But before I could, the shorter officer reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "We found this in his room," he said, placing it gently on the coffee table in front of me. My hands shook as I picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakable. Leo's uneven scrawl, the letters pressed hard into the paper as if he'd been gripping the pen too tightly. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I love you." That was all it said. 3 short sentences that felt heavier than any book I had ever held in my life. As I sat there, a smaller slip of paper fell from between the folds. I recognized it instantly. A faded ticket stub from a concert Richard and I had gone to when we were barely more than kids ourselves. It had been our first real date, the Gee, one we told stories about for years. I had no idea Leo even knew about it, much less that he had kept the stub. My vision blurred as I ran my fingers over the worn edges. This wasn't just a goodbye. It was a breadcrumb, a piece of himself he'd chosen to leave behind. But why this? Why now? The officers watched me carefully, perhaps waiting for me to break, or to offer some clue they could use. I told them I had no idea where Leo might be, but the truth was, my mind was already spinning through possibilities. There was a small diner he liked on the outskirts of town, the one with the jukebox that still played old rock songs. There was the abandoned barn near the river, where he and his friends sometimes went to fish, or, more likely, to be where adults couldn't find them. But the ticket stub changed everything. It wasn't random. If Leo was reaching for that piece of my past, there had to be a reason. The taller officer scribbled in his notebook, asking me to stay by the phone and not to contact anyone outside my immediate family until they knew more. I nodded, but inside, a knot of determination was forming beneath my ribs. I had been a librarian for 42 years. I knew how to follow trails, even faint ones. And if my grandson had left me a clue, then I was going to find out what it meant, even if it took every ounce of strength I had left. When they left, the silence in the house was almost unbearable. I walked slowly to Leo's room, pausing at the doorway. It smelled faintly of his cologne, mixed with the earthy scent of the sneakers he always left half under his bed. The bed itself was unmade, a crumpled t-shirt thrown across the pillow. I sat down on the edge, holding the note and ticket stub in my lap, and felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Not just fear, but resolve. If the police were looking for him, fine. But so was I. I started with the obvious, checking the places Leo loved most. The first was the diner on Route 14, the one with Peeling Us. Red booths and a waitress named Marlene who'd been there since before Leo was born. I pulled on my coat, tucked the note and ticket stub into my pocket, and drove with the radio off, letting the silence press in. When I walked into the diner, the smell of fried onions and coffee was exactly as I remembered. Marlene spotted me right away, wiping her hands on her apron. "Evelyn," she said softly, like she already knew why I was there. I asked if she'd seen Leo. She shook her head, but hesitated, before adding, "He came by 2 nights ago. Didn't eat much. Kept checking the clock. Looked troubled." Her words sat heavy in my chest. From there, I drove toward the river. The abandoned barn stood like a broken tooth against the winter sky, its boards warped from years of floods and neglect. I parked a little ways off and walked through the frost-stiff grass, my breath clouding in the air. The barn door groaned when I pushed it open, the smell of damp wood and animal nests hitting me at once. No Leo, just a few empty soda cans, a crumpled jacket that didn't belong to him, and the hollow echo of a place that had seen too many secrets. I stood there for a while, my fingers tight around the ticket stub in my pocket, wondering if I was chasing shadows. Back home, I made myself tea but couldn't bring myself to drink it. The police had said to wait, but waiting felt like surrender. I went to my bedroom and pulled down the old photo albums Richard and I had kept on the top shelf of the closet. I flipped through page after page until I found the photo from that concert night. Me in a yellow dress, Richard in his good shirt, holding hands in front of the marquee. I stared at it, trying to see it through Leo's eyes. Had he found this photo and made the connection? Was he trying to lead me somewhere tied to that night? I thought about the venue where the concert had been held, the Blue Lantern Hall, which had closed years ago. The building was still there, though, now an event space, for weddings and small gatherings. It was an odd connection for Leo to make, but maybe it wasn't about the place itself. Maybe it was about what that night had meant. Freedom, youth, taking a risk to do something you loved. My mind kept circling back to the idea that he was telling me where to find him without saying it outright. The next morning, I called the owner of the Blue Lantern Hall, a man named Tom who had gone to school with Richard. I told him I was doing some personal research and asked if anyone had been poking around the property lately. There was a pause before he said, "Now that you mention it, I saw a kid hanging around 2 days ago. Dark hoodie, kept his hood up, didn't look familiar. He took off when I came out to check. My heart picked up speed. I asked if I could stop by, and he agreed to meet me in the afternoon. When I arrived, the hall looked smaller than I remembered. The brick facade was chipped, the paint on the doors faded. Tom greeted me at the side. Entrance and let me in, the scent of old wood and faint dust greeting us. "I'll show you where I saw him," he said, leading me toward the backstage area. It was there, tucked behind an old piano, that I saw it, a folded piece of notebook paper. My hands shook as I opened it. In the same hurried handwriting, Leo had written, "Don't trust everyone. I'll find you." No signature, no date. The words hit me like a cold wave. Don't trust everyone. Was he talking about the gang? The police? Someone else? Entirely? I tucked the note into my coat and thanked Tom, forcing my face to remain calm even as my mind spun. If Leo was leaving these messages for me, it meant he was still close enough to watch. It also meant he was in danger, and that he believed I was too. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. A dark SUV had been behind me for 3 turns, and when I slowed, it slowed too. I pulled into a grocery store lot, and it kept going, but the unease lingered. That night, I double-checked the locks, closed the curtains tight, and sat at the kitchen table with both notes laid out in front of me. My grandson was out there, somewhere between danger and hope, and I was going to find him, no matter how many breadcrumbs I had to follow. The next morning, I woke before dawn, unable to shake the image of that SUV in my rearview mirror. The house felt too still, the kind of quiet that makes you listen for things that aren't there. I made coffee, but my hands trembled as I poured it, and I realized I needed to tell someone I could trust beyond question. My first thought was Helen, my oldest friend. She'd been my neighbor for 30 years before moving across town, and she had a knack for noticing things other people missed. I called her, my voice low, and asked if she could come over. She didn't ask why, just said she'd be there in 20 minutes. Helen arrived bundled in her thick wool coat, her silver hair tucked under a knitted hat. She listened as I told her about the notes, the ticket stub, the sighting at the Blue Lantern Hall, and the SUV. She didn't interrupt, just sat there with her hands folded, the same way she had when I told her about Richard's passing all those years ago. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Evelyn, you need to be careful. If Leo's telling you not to trust everyone, then you can't assume the police are on your side entirely. You should keep everything he's left you somewhere safe, somewhere outside this house." Her words made sense. Together, we drove to her place, a small bungalow tucked behind a row of pine trees. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and laundry detergent, comfort in its purest form. I gave her the notes and the ticket stub, and she tucked them into a decorative tin on a high shelf in her pantry. "No one but me will touch this," she promised. I felt lighter leaving them there, as if I'd just hidden pieces of my heart in a vault. Back home, I decided to search Leo's room more thoroughly. I pulled open drawers, checked under the mattress, and even ran my hands along the inside seams of his backpack. In the smallest zippered pocket, I found a USB drive, no bigger than my thumb. It was taped inside, hidden well enough that I almost missed it. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if this was the sensitive data the police had mentioned. My first instinct was to plug it into my computer, but the thought of whatever might be on it, and who might come looking for it, stopped me cold. Instead, I drove to the library. It was closed on Sundays, but I had my volunteer key. I slipped into one of the back offices and used the old staff computer, the one not connected to the internet. Plugging in the USB, I held my breath. There were only 2 files, both video clips. The first showed grainy footage of 3 men in hoodies breaking into an office, moving with the precision of people who'd done it before. The second was a close-up of one man's face as he removed his mask to speak into a phone, someone I recognized instantly. It was Paul Mercer, the businessman's own nephew, and one of the most well-connected men in town. My stomach flipped. If Leo had this, then he was more than just a witness. He was holding evidence that could ruin powerful people. No wonder he was in danger. I copied the files to a blank USB I kept in my bag and locked the original in my desk drawer. My heart pounded as I left the library, glancing over my shoulder more than once. There were 5. Streets felt emptier than usual, the wind cutting sharper against my cheeks. That night, Helen called to check on me, and I debated whether to tell her about the USB. In the end, I decided not to. Not yet. The fewer people who knew, the safer she would be. But I could hear the concern in her voice when she said, "Evelyn, you sound different. Just don't try to do this all on your own." I thanked her, but the truth was, I didn't see another choice. This was my grandson. If I didn't fight for him, who would? The next morning, I woke with a plan forming in my mind. I replayed the video clips over and over in my head as I made breakfast, the smell of toast barely registering. Paul Mercer wasn't just any local name. He had influence, money, and a way of making problems disappear. If Leo had filmed that footage, it meant he was in deeper than I could have imagined. I needed to figure out when and where those clips had been taken, and if there was any link to places Leo might run to. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my notepad, sketching out the details I could remember from the videos. The angle of the camera, the furniture in the background, the color of the walls. Every detail mattered now. It was the second video that caught my attention most. Behind Paul, there was a distinctive clock on the wall, round, with a deep green frame and gold numerals. I had seen one just like it before, years ago, in the back office of a defunct printing company near the Thai Industrial Park. That building had been closed for over a decade, but people still used it as a kind of unofficial meeting place. Out of sight, out of mind. If Leo had been there, it could explain the grainy lighting and the quick hidden angle of the camera. I decided I'd drive out that way after dark, when fewer people would notice me snooping around. The hours until nightfall crawled. I kept busy, watering my roses in the cold air just to keep my mind from spiraling. But every creak of the floorboards inside made me turn my head. By the time the sun dipped low, I had layered up in my warmest coat, tucked a small flashlight in my pocket, and slipped the spare USB into my purse. My car engine sounded too loud in the stillness of the neighborhood, but I didn't see that black SUV or any other cars on my way out of town. The industrial park was silent, save for the distant hum of a generator somewhere. The old printing company sat at the far end, its windows covered in grime. The door, chained but not locked. The chain hung loosely, like someone wanted it to look secure but left it easy to enter. Inside, the air was damp, smelling faintly of mildew and machine oil. My flashlight beam caught on scattered paper, overturned chairs, and a few newer footprints in the dust. My pulse quickened. Leo could have been here recently. I followed the prints to the back office, and there it was, the green-framed clock, still hanging crooked on the wall. My breath caught as I imagined Leo here, crouched in the shadows, filming in silence while men like Paul talked business they couldn't afford to have overheard. In the corner, I noticed a small scrap of fabric caught on a nail, navy blue, like the hoodie Leo often wore. My fingers shook as I pulled it free, tucking it into my coat pocket. Proof he had been here. Suddenly, a noise echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, a metallic clatter, like a pipe being dropped. I froze, every muscle in my body going still. My instinct told me to run, but my ears strained to catch another sound. Footsteps followed, slow and deliberate, the kind that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I clicked off my flashlight and backed toward the door, my heart thudding against my ribs. By the time I reached my car, my hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. I started the engine and drove away without looking back, but the reflection in my rearview mirror showed a tall figure stepping out of the building's doorway, watching me. Leave. My chest felt tight all the way home. I didn't know if it was Paul, one of his men, or someone else entirely, but I knew one thing. I wasn't just following Leo's trail anymore. Someone was now following mine. Back at the house, I locked every door and window, then sat at the kitchen table with the scrap of navy fabric in front of me. It felt like a lifeline and a warning at the same time. If Leo was still alive, he was close enough to leave signs, but so were the people who wanted to keep him silent. I pressed my palms flat on the table and made myself a promise. I would not wait for the police to bring me answers. Tomorrow, I was going to confront Paul Mercer myself. The next day, I dressed with more care than usual, choosing a dark wool coat and my plainest scarf. I didn't want to look confrontational. I wanted to look like a grandmother running errands. My plan was risky, but I couldn't ignore the chance that Paul might slip up if I caught him off guard. I drove into town and parked 2 blocks from his office, a sleek glass-fronted building that stood out against Maple Grove's otherwise modest main street. The receptionist looked surprised to see me, but smiled politely. "I'm here to see Paul Mercer," I said, my voice steady. "Tell him it's Evelyn Reed. It's about a family matter." Her eyes flickered with curiosity before she picked up the phone. Paul came out 5 minutes later, wearing a tailored gray suit and an expression halfway between annoyance and amusement. "Mrs. Reed," he said smoothly, as if we were old acquaintances. "This is unexpected." I forced a smile. "I thought we should talk. Privately." He gestured toward a small conference room, and I followed, my fingers gripping my purse strap tight enough to ache. When the door closed, I wasted no time. "You know where my grandson is," I said, "and I want him back safe." His smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "That's a bold accusation." I leaned forward. "I've been around long enough to know. When a man's hiding something, Leo saw you during that robbery. He has proof. And if anything happens to him, I'll make sure the right people see it." It was a gamble, revealing I knew about the footage, but I wanted to see his reaction. For the first time, he looked unsettled. Just a flicker, but enough to tell me I had hit the mark. Paul sat back, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Reed, if Leo has information, then he's in more danger than you realize. These are not people you can bargain with." I kept my voice firm. "Then help me. If you want to protect yourself, you'll help me find him before they do." There was a long pause before he said, "Meet me tonight, 9 o'clock, at the old freight station on Elm Road. Come alone." My heart pounded, but I nodded, masking my unease. I left his office without looking back, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed that this could be a trap, but it might also be my only shot at finding Leo. Back home, I called Helen and told her a partial truth, that I was meeting someone who might know where Leo was. I gave her the location and time and told her if she didn't hear from me by midnight, she should call the police. She didn't like it, but she agreed. Night came faster than I expected. The freight station was a relic from another era, its loading docks sagging, the paint on its sign nearly gone. A single streetlight buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow. I parked a short distance away and walked the last few yards, my breath clouding. In the cold air, Paul was already there, leaning against a black sedan, hands in his coat pockets. "You came," he said, as if surprised. "You said you had information," I replied. He glanced around before speaking. "Leo's alive. He's being kept in a safe house outside town, but the people holding him don't trust me enough to let him go without insurance." My chest tightened. "What kind of insurance?" His eyes met mine. "The USB drive. Give it to me, and I can get him out." I stared at him, every nerve screaming that this was wrong. "If I give it to you, how do I know you won't just hand it over to protect yourself and leave Leo behind?" Paul's expression softened, almost convincingly. "Because if I wanted him gone, Mrs. Reed, you wouldn't be here right now." His words chilled me, but I didn't answer. Instead, I told him I needed time to think. He gave me until the following night and then slipped into his car, disappearing into the dark. I drove home from the freight station with my fingers locked so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles ached. Paul's offer spun in my mind like a loose wheel, dangerous and unpredictable. Giving him the USB could mean Leo's freedom, or it could mean losing both the evidence and my grandson forever. I replayed every word he'd said, searching for a hint of truth or a crack in his polished lies. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew one thing for certain. If I was going to do this, I couldn't walk into it blind. I needed to know exactly who was holding Leo and where this so-called safe house was. Inside, I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't want and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the dark liquid until it went cold. My mind went back to the video clips. Paul hadn't been alone during that robbery. 2 other men had been with him. One of them had a distinctive tattoo creeping up the side of his neck, a curling black design like the edge of a flame. I remembered seeing a man with that same tattoo years ago, at O'Malley's Garage, a rundown auto shop on the far edge of town. If he was still around, maybe he was still tied to Paul, and maybe, just maybe, he was careless enough to leave a trail. The next morning, I drove to the garage. The smell of oil and burnt rubber clung to the air, and the yard was cluttered with half-stripped cars and rusting tools. A man in a grease-stained shirt looked up from under a hood as I approached, and there it was. The flame tattoo. Faded now, but unmistakable. "Looking for a mechanic?" he asked, his tone guarded. I forced a polite smile. "Actually, I'm looking for my grandson. He's been missing, and I think someone you know might have seen him." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. I caught the flicker of recognition when I mentioned Leo's name, but he masked it quickly. I kept my voice gentle but persistent, the way I used to when coaxing information out of reluctant library patrons. "I just want to know he's safe," I said. "That's all." He wiped his hands on a rag, avoiding my gaze. "Kid's fine," he muttered, almost too quietly to hear. My pulse jumped. "Where is he?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, lady." And with that, he turned back to the car, shutting the conversation down like slamming a door. It wasn't much, but it was something. He hadn't denied knowing where Leo was, and if he said Leo was fine, that meant he was alive, at least for now. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, the winter sun glaring off the windshield, and thought about my next move. I couldn't just hand the USB to Paul without some kind of leverage. If I could find the safe house first, I might be able to get Leo out before the deal even happened. That night, I called Helen again, this time telling her everything. The USB, the videos, Paul's meeting, the man at the garage. She was silent for a long moment, and then she said, "Evelyn, this is too big for you to do alone. Let me come with you tomorrow night." I hesitated. Helen was brave, but she wasn't part of this world of threats and shadows. Still, having someone I trusted by my side might tip the odds in my favor. I told her to meet me at my house at 8, and we'd decide from there. After hanging up, I retrieved the USB from its hiding place in the library desk drawer and slipped it into my purse. I didn't know yet if I'd give it to Paul, but I was done being passive. Tomorrow night, one way or another, I would see my grandson again, whether Paul liked it or not. Helen arrived at my house the next evening with the same determined look she'd worn when she marched into the school board meeting years ago to demand new textbooks for the kids. She carried a small thermos of coffee, a flashlight, and, to my surprise, a can of pepper spray. "Don't look at me like that," she said, slipping it into her coat pocket. "If we're going to wade into the lion's den, I want more than harsh words to defend us." I couldn't help but smile, though my stomach was tight. We sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking loud in the quiet, and went over the plan one last time. Meet Paul at the freight station at 9, hear what he had to say, but keep our eyes open for any sign of where Leo might be. If an opportunity came, we'd take it. Before we left, I took the USB from my purse and placed it inside an envelope, sealing it with a strip of tape. I wasn't sure if I'd actually hand it over, but I wanted it ready. Helen watched me do it. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You know this could all be a setup," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "But if Leo's in that safe house and this gets him out, I'll take the risk." The truth was, I didn't trust Paul as far as I could throw him, but I was betting on the idea that his own self-interest might align with mine, at least for tonight. We left just after 8:30, the streets mostly empty, the kind of stillness that makes every sound seem louder. The freight station loomed. Ahead, lit by that same flickering streetlight. Paul's black sedan was there again, parked at an angle. He stepped out as we approached, his eyes flicking briefly to Helen before settling on me. "You brought company," he said, not hiding his disapproval. "She's here for my safety," I answered. "You don't get to set all the rules." Paul motioned us toward the loading dock, his voice low. "The safe house is 10 miles outside town, near Miller's Crossing. You give me the USB, I'll make a call, and..." Leo walks out. I studied his face, searching for cracks, but it was like staring at polished stone. "And if I refuse?" I asked. He gave a small shrug. "Then we both lose. And I'm not in the mood to lose." The arrogance in his tone made my hands itch, but I kept my expression calm. I reached into my coat and pulled out the envelope, holding it just out of his reach. "Before you get this, I want proof he's alive. A phone call. I want to hear his voice." Paul hesitated, then pulled a sleek black phone from his pocket. He stepped a few feet away, dialed, and waited. "Talk," he said into the phone, then handed it to me. My breath caught as I heard it, faint, shaky, but unmistakably Leo. "Grandma?" he said. "I'm okay. Don't..." The line went dead before he could finish. The sound of his voice lit something fierce inside me. I glanced at Helen, who gave a slight nod. I handed Paul the envelope, my hand steady even as my heart raced. He took it, slid it into his coat, and pulled out a set of keys. "Miller's Crossing," he said. "Old farmhouse with a red door. You'll find him there. But you didn't get that from me." He turned and walked back to his car without another word. We waited until he was gone, the sound of his engine fading into the night. Then Helen and I hurried to my car. The address burned into my mind. The road to Miller's Crossing was dark, lined with bare trees that reached like black fingers toward the sky. My headlights cut a narrow path, and with each mile, my grip on the steering wheel tightened. I had no idea what we'd find at that farmhouse, but I knew one thing. I was bringing my grandson home. When we reached the red-doored farmhouse, it looked deserted. No lights, no movement. We parked a short distance away and approached on foot, the frozen ground crunching under our boots. My breath was loud in my ears as I tried the front door. Locked. Helen pointed toward a side window, slightly ajar. "After you," she whispered. I pushed it open, the old wood, groaning, and slipped inside into the darkness. The air inside the farmhouse was stale, thick with the smell of dust and something metallic, like old coins. Moonlight spilled in through gaps in the boarded windows, cutting silver lines across the warped wooden floor. Helen climbed in after me, her flashlight gripped tight but still off. We stood there for a moment, letting our ears adjust. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard the faint hum of a refrigerator, and closer still, the soft groan of wood settling under weight. I gestured toward the hallway, and we moved, our footsteps careful, barely breathing. The first door we tried led to what looked like an abandoned living room, furniture draped in yellowed sheets, a coffee table coated in dust. The second was a kitchen, its counters cluttered with takeout containers and half-empty bottles of water. That alone told me someone had been here recently. My pulse quickened. I whispered Leo's name, my voice barely above air, but the only answer was the creak of the floorboards beneath us. Helen's eyes darted toward the back of the house. "Basement," she mouthed. I nodded. We found the basement door at the end of the hall, closed but unlocked. As I turned the handle, a faint sound reached us, muffled, rhythmic. My throat tightened. It could have been anything, but it sounded like breathing. We descended the steps slowly, each creak of the wood feeling like a gunshot in the silence. The air grew colder, damp, and the smell of mildew mixed with something sharper. Fear, if fear had a scent. At the bottom of the stairs, the beam of Helen's flashlight finally flicked on. Against the far wall, in a chair with his hands bound in front of him, sat Leo. His hoodie was dirty, his hair a mess, but his eyes, wide, startled, locked on mine. "Grandma?" His voice was hoarse, cracked from disuse. Relief hit me so hard it made my knees weak. I crossed the room in 3 steps, my hands already pulling at the knots around his wrists. Before we could free him completely, a noise upstairs made us freeze. Heavy footsteps, fast and deliberate, heading toward the basement door. Helen swung the flashlight beam upward, and I felt my chest tighten. We didn't have time to get out before whoever it was came down those stairs. "Hide," I whispered, though I knew there was no good place to go. Helen positioned herself near the base of the stairs, pepper spray ready, while I kept working on Leo's bindings with trembling fingers. The basement door slammed open, and a man appeared in the frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and a ski mask. He froze when the flashlight beam hit him, his hand twitching toward his side. "Don't even think about it," Helen said sharply, her voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. He hesitated, and in that heartbeat, I yanked the last knot free and pulled Leo to his feet. "Go!" I hissed, shoving him toward the far corner where a small window sat just above ground level. Leo scrambled. Through first, then Helen, and I followed, scraping my hands on the frame as I pulled myself out into the icy night air. We landed hard on the frozen grass, the sound of footsteps pounding above us. I grabbed Leo's hand and we ran for the car, the cold slicing into my lungs. Behind us, a shout rang out, but I didn't look back. Not until we were in the car, doors locked, engine roaring, did I let myself believe we might actually make it out. I drove with one eye on the road and the other on the mirror, half expecting headlights to appear behind us. Leo sat in the back seat, silent, his head resting against the window. Helen was breathing hard, her hand still clutching the pepper spray. No one spoke until we were well past the edge of town. "You're safe now," I said finally, glancing at Leo in the mirror. He didn't answer, but his eyes met mine for a moment, and in them, I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who still knew I'd come for him, no matter what it cost. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I took a winding route toward Helen's house, avoiding the main roads and doubling back twice to make sure no one was following us. When we finally pulled into her driveway, the tension in my shoulders eased just enough for me to breathe normally. Helen ushered us inside, locking the door behind us and pulling the curtains tight. The warmth of her living room was almost too much after the cold night air. Leo sank into the couch without a word, his hands resting limp on his knees. He looked older than 17 in that moment, tired, worn down, like someone who'd seen far too much. I sat across from him, my heart aching, and waited. Eventually, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "I didn't mean to drag you into this, Grandma." I leaned forward. "Leo, I'm your family. You don't get to decide I'm not involved when your life is on the line." His eyes flickered up to mine, guilt pooling in them. "It started the night of the robbery," he said. "I wasn't part of it, I swear. I was just walking home from the diner when I saw those guys go into the building. I recognized one of them from the garage. I hid and filmed them because I thought it would be proof if anything happened to Mr. Peterson." He rubbed his hands together, staring at the floor. "I didn't know Paul was in on it until he pulled off his mask. When I realized who it was, I panicked. I knew they'd come after me if they found out I'd seen everything. And they did. A couple days later, one of them cornered me outside school and told me to keep my mouth shut or they'd make it permanent." My chest tightened at those words. "So you picked a fight with me that night? To push me away?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I thought if you were mad at me, you wouldn't get caught up in this." I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was a deep, heavy sorrow. "Leo, nothing you could say or do would make me stop caring about you. Spitting in my face hurt, yes, but thinking you had to go through this alone hurts even more." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do." I reached across the coffee table and took his hand, giving it a squeeze. "We're here now. That's what matters." Helen brought us each a mug of hot tea, the steam curling into the dim light. "The police need to know about the USB," she said quietly. Leo's head snapped up. "You have it?" I nodded. "It's what kept Paul talking instead of acting. But we need to use it smartly. Turn it over in a way that protects you." His brows furrowed. "You can't trust the local cops. Some of them are in Paul's pocket. I've heard them talking at the garage." The warning sent a fresh chill through me. We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the faint ticking of Helen's wall clock. Then I made a decision. "Tomorrow morning, we're going to the state police office 2 towns over. We'll hand over the USB directly to the investigator in charge of organized crime. No middlemen, no local interference." Helen nodded in agreement. "I'll drive us," she said, "and I'll stay until I know they've heard every word." Leo's eyes softened with a mix of relief and fear. What if they can't protect us? I reached for his shoulder. "Then we protect ourselves. But you're not alone anymore. Not for a second." For the first time in days, I saw the faintest ghost of a smile on his face, and it was enough to remind me why I'd risked everything to bring him back. We left at first light, the horizon still bruised, with the last shades of night. I sat in the passenger seat while Helen drove, Leo in the back with his hood pulled low. The air inside the car was quiet but heavy, each of us turning over our own thoughts. The state police office was just over an hour away, but it felt longer. I clutched my purse in my lap, the USB sealed inside an envelope, my fingers tracing the edges over and over. Every so often, I glanced at the rearview mirror to check for a tail, but the road stayed empty except for the occasional pickup or semi-truck. When we arrived, The building was nothing like the small-town police station I was used to. Tall, modern, all glass and steel. It looked like the kind of place where decisions carried weight. At the front desk, a uniformed officer listened as I asked for the investigator in charge of organized crime. "Detective Harris," she said, picking up the phone. A few minutes later, a man in a dark suit appeared, tall with a calm but watchful expression. "Mrs. Reed?" he asked. I nodded. "Come with me, please." In his office, I placed the envelope on the desk without a word. Harris slid it toward himself, opening it carefully. When he saw the USB, he raised an eyebrow. "May I ask where this came from?" I glanced at Leo, who was staring at the floor, and then back at Harris. "It contains video evidence of a robbery that took place last week in Maple Grove. My grandson filmed it. He's been threatened, kidnapped, and nearly silenced because of what's on there." The words came out steady, but I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Harris plugged the USB into his computer, watching the two clips in silence. His expression didn't change much, but when Paul Mercer's face filled the screen, I caught the slightest tightening of his jaw. "This," he said slowly, "is exactly the kind of proof we've been trying to get for months, and it's going to bring a lot more than one man down." He looked at Leo then, his tone softening. "You did the right thing, son. I know. It cost you." Leo shifted uncomfortably but managed to meet his gaze. "I just didn't want anyone else to get hurt." Harris nodded, then turned to me. "We can place both of you under protective custody while we act on this. It won't be forever, just until we can make arrests and ensure you're safe." The offer made sense, but the idea of leaving my home, my roses, my life, felt like another kind of loss. Still, I knew I couldn't risk Leo's safety for comfort. "We'll do it," I said firmly. "Helen spoke up from her chair by the wall. "And I'll look after the house while they're gone. No one will get past me." Harris gave her a small smile. "I believe you." He excused himself to make some calls, leaving us alone for a few minutes. Leo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I guess this is it, huh? No going back." I reached over and squeezed his hand. No going back, but maybe going forward in a way that finally makes sense. When Harris returned, he told us arrangements were already being made. "We'll relocate you today, somewhere quiet, off the radar. I'll be in contact as soon as we have movement on Mercer and his associates." His efficiency was reassuring, though I could feel Leo's unease growing by the minute. The thought of disappearing even temporarily felt surreal. But then I thought of that night in the basement, of how close I'd come to losing him, and any doubt evaporated. As we left the office under Harris's escort, I caught a glimpse of the parking lot from the corner of my eye. Parked far off near the fence was a black sedan, too far to see the driver. I felt the old chill creep into my bones, but this time, I didn't look away. Whoever was watching needed to know one thing. I wasn't afraid anymore. The relocation happened faster than I expected. Within an hour, Harris had us in the back of an unmarked SUV. The windows tinted so dark the world outside felt like a distant memory. The driver said nothing, his eyes fixed on the road, while Harris spoke, quietly into his phone. Leo sat between us, staring straight ahead, his leg bouncing restlessly. I rested my hand on his knee to steady him, though my own heart was just as unsettled. Leaving Maple Grove without so much as a change of clothes felt like tearing away a piece of myself. But I reminded myself this wasn't forever. It was survival. Our new home was a cabin on the edge of a frozen lake 2 counties over. It looked more like a weekend retreat than a safe house. Stone fireplace, pine walls, and the faint smell of wood smoke lingering in the air. Harris explained that it belonged to a retired officer who now spent his winters in Florida. "No one knows you're here but us," he said, handing me a prepaid cell phone. "If you see or hear anything suspicious, you call me first, not the local police." I nodded, the weight of those words settling in. The first night was the hardest. The wind rattled the windows and every creak of the wooden beams sounded like footsteps. I stayed up, late by the fireplace, a blanket over my shoulders, watching the flames and thinking about my roses back home. I wondered if Helen had remembered to cover them in burlap against the frost. Leo came down from the loft just before midnight, unable to sleep. He sat beside me, silent for a long time before saying, "It feels weird, being safe." His voice cracked on the word, safe, and I realized how long it had been since he'd felt it. Over the next 2 days, Harris called with updates. The task force had surveillance on Mercer and 2 of his known associates, including the man with the flame tattoo. "We're building the case," he said. "The video evidence is gold, but we need them in the act for the bigger charges to stick." Each call was both a relief and a reminder that the danger wasn't gone. It was simply paused. Leo kept close to me, rarely venturing outside except to stand on the porch and watch the ice shift on the lake. On the 3rd morning, we woke to the sound of tires on gravel. My heart jumped until I saw it was Harris, stepping out of the SUV with a grim look on his face. "We've got movement," he said without preamble. "Mercer's people know the state police are involved. They're scrambling to clean up loose ends, which means we need to act now." He explained that they planned to raid 3 locations simultaneously that night: Mercer's office, the garage, and the farmhouse where Leo had been held. "You're staying here until I call," he added firmly. "No exceptions." The waiting was unbearable. I tried reading, knitting, even baking with the limited supplies in the cabin, but my mind was fixed on what was happening miles away. Leo paced so much I thought he'd wear a groove into the floorboards. As night fell, the tension grew sharper, like the air before a storm. The cabin felt too small, too quiet. Even the lake seemed to hold its breath. It was nearly midnight when the phone finally rang. Harris's voice was tired but steady. "It's done. Mercer and his associates are in custody. We've recovered additional evidence from all 3 locations. With what Leo gave us, they won't be able to wriggle out of this." I closed my eyes, the relief hitting me like a wave. "When can we come home?" I asked. There was a pause. "Soon," he said. "We just need to make sure no one else connected to them is still at large." When I hung up, Leo was watching me, waiting for the verdict. "They got them," I told him. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, he let out a genuine, unguarded laugh. I pulled him into a hug, feeling the warmth of his breath against my neck. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, more to myself than to him. But for once, I believed it. We returned to Maple Grove 5 days later, escorted by 2 state police cars that peeled off only when my house came into view. Pulling into the driveway felt strange, as if the place had been frozen in time while we were gone. The porch swing swayed gently in. The wind. My rose garden buried under a layer of frost. The curtains just as I'd left them. Helen was waiting on the porch, bundled in her heavy coat, a smile breaking across her face the second she saw us. She wrapped me in a hug that smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap, then pulled Leo into her arms like she'd been holding that embrace for weeks. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Too exactly. The teacup I'd abandoned on the kitchen counter before the freight station meeting was still there, the faint brown stain at the bottom a reminder of how fast everything had unraveled. Harris had warned me that Paul's people might have tried to intimidate us by breaking in while we were gone, but nothing seemed disturbed. Even so, I checked each room, opening closets and peering under beds. Before I let myself exhale fully, Leo wandered through the house quietly, his fingertips brushing the walls as though he needed to reassure himself it was real. In the living room, he paused at the photo of Richard on the mantel, studying it for a long moment. "I think he'd have been proud of you," I said softly from behind him. Leo didn't turn, but I saw his shoulders rise and fall. "I hope so." His voice was steadier now, less weighted with the fear that had followed him like a shadow. That afternoon, Helen stayed to make lunch, filling the house with the smell of chicken soup. We sat at the table, bowls steaming, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to normal. But beneath the warmth, there was an awareness that life had changed. The innocence of quiet evenings and unspoken trust had been replaced by a sharper understanding of the world. A world where danger could come to your door without warning. In the days that followed, the news spread quickly. Headlines named Paul Mercer and his associates, detailing the charges and the evidence against them. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and cautious questions, their voices dropping when they asked how we were. Holding up. I gave them polite answers, careful not to reveal too much. Some part of me still believed there were ears listening that shouldn't be. Leo began going back to school under a watchful eye, the state police keeping a discreet distance. He was quieter than before, but there was a new resolve in him. One evening, as we sat in the kitchen, he told me he'd started volunteering at the youth center downtown. I figured, if someone had been there for me when I started messing up, maybe things would have been different, he said. My heart swelled at the thought, knowing he was choosing to turn his experience into something good. One morning, I returned to my